Hi, and welcome to another episode of Around the Neighborhood with me, Scott McMahon. This is a show about the quest for fun, history, and mystery in our backyards. And today we're in West Linn, or is it Willamette? Or is it West Linn? Or is it Willamette? Or what's the difference? Well, let's find out. So if we go back in time, we can imagine that the Native Americans used to occupy this area by the Willamette River, near the Willamette Falls, to hunt, to fish, to wash up. And then it wasn't until the 1800s that we had all the people from the east coming out here to settle and to take advantage of the Homestead Act. So this area of Willamette was originally founded by three landowners, Marshall Perrin, Ambrose Fields, and his son Joseph Fields later on. Eventually the lands owned by Perrin were handed down through succession and then eventually sold to B.F. Baker in 1885. Then, 8 years later, Baker sells the land, this area that we know as really historic downtown Willamette, to the Willamette Falls Electric Company that eventually turned into Portland General Electric. One of the things the Willamette Falls Electric Company did with the newly purchased land was construct the Willamette Falls Railway System, which, by the way, I have a whole separate episode about the forgotten history of the Willamette Falls Railway System, and I'll leave the link below for that one. So at this point, the Willamette Falls Electric Company is able to transport their employees that lived over in this area over to Willamette Falls, to do their work. But there wasn't really a town or city that was built during that time. It wasn't until Nicholas Walden, on behalf of the Electric Company, that platted the first remnants of what we know as historic Willamette. One of the cool things is that Willamette was considered a modern-day electric city. So all the houses that were built here had access to electricity before a lot of homes did. Cap and Shoe Factory used to exist from 12th Street all the way down to 7th Street back in the late 1800s, and employed a lot of people here in Willamette during that time. They took advantage of electricity being pumped through by the Willamette Falls Electric Company. But today, as you can see, there's some construction going on, and this has been part of a plan in the making for many, many years. That's why it's so noisy with all the construction. So this is going to go on for a couple months, so the residents have to put up with it, as well as the businesses. But there's a whole design plan available in the links below that should give you a better idea of, as the rain's pouring down on me, of what they plan for the historic Willamette district. In fact, Willamette didn't become a historical district until 2009, so only a few years ago that I got, officially sanctioned that designation. So I thought I'd take a break from downtown Willamette because it was really noisy with all the construction, and head over here to Fields Bridge Park. And as I mentioned, there were three main landowners that own most of all the land that we know as Willamette today. And two of those people were Ambrose Fields and his son Joseph Fields. And of course, they name it Fields Bridge Park. So with all the excitement that Willamette had about the possibilities of growing their new modern-day electric city into something even bigger, well, it just didn't happen. For some reason, it just stalled out, and it just became the small little town that we know of it today. However, during that excitement, they were able to incorporate themselves into the first city in this area in 1908. So the question is, how did Willamette get incorporated into West Linn? Well, this is how it happened. Just like Willamette was owned by only a few families, well, West Linn was made up of just a few areas owned by a few families. Areas that we know now as like Sunset Neighborhood, as well as Bolton Neighborhood. Well, after Willamette incorporated and became an official city, the outlying areas of West Linn formed to become West Linn. Now, they made a deal, a contract with Oregon City to gain access to their water supply because Oregon City had built a pipeline from the Clackamas River over to Oregon City, and then they pumped that to West Linn. So it's very important because now West Linn had clean water being supplied by Oregon City. Now you have to remember that Willamette officially formed as a city in 1908. Then 2 years later, a typhoid fever outbreak hit the town, and 10% of the residents, and with one person dying of the fever, caused a lot of concerns of where did this come from. So they determined that the source of the typhoid outbreak came from the polluted springs that were drawing water from the Willamette River, and that was infecting the residents of Willamette at the time. Now that wasn't happening over West Linn. So none of this is officially on the record, but apparently it looks like Willamette approached West Linn to ask for help for clean water. And interesting enough, the newly formed city of West Linn said that they would help out only if Willamette agreed to be absorbed into the city of West Linn. Now the city of Willamette didn't originally agree to that deal, but then 1 year later in 1911, another typhoid outbreak hit the town. So at that point, the citizens were like, that's enough, we'll go ahead and vote to be absorbed by West Linn. Now it took a couple of years later before the official annexing of Willamette into the city of West Linn, and that actually happened on February 14th, 1916. So Valentine's Day is sort of the official date when Willamette officially became part of the city of West Linn. So hopefully that gives you context of why Willamette is called Willamette and not necessarily West Linn. And residents do take great pride in the fact that they do live in Willamette as opposed to the outside surrounding area of West Linn. Here's what's interesting is that in 1910, when the first typhoid outbreak happened, they were able to determine that it did come from the polluted springs. However, when it happened again 1 year later in 1911, there is no official report of where the source came from. So the question is, was there a sabotage that happened? Did somebody in Willamette want to be part of West Linn? Or was it someone on the West Linn side wanting to make sure that Willamette came into the city of West Linn? Who knows? But I hope you enjoyed this episode, and since the show is sponsored by my real estate services, all my contact information is listed below in case you have any questions about buying or selling a home, especially in this area. And I want to make sure no one goes away empty-handed, so I offer a free fun gear guide over at freefunguide.net. That's over at freefunguide.net. It's a little silly little book of a collection of stuff I put together that makes any day super fun. So thanks for sticking around with me, and I'll see you around the neighborhood. Well, who knows? Anything could have happened in the pioneer days. So who knows? Anything could have happened back at the turn of the century. So who knows? Anything could have happened back in the turn of the 1900s. So who knows? Anything could have happened in the early 1900s. Well, now Willamette, now the city of